The low rumble of 1,000 dragon hearts shook the walls of the cave. The air was hot and smelled like molten rock deep in Ember Peak's nesting chamber. Ember Peak is the Dragon Kingdom's biggest volcano. It was once again time for the eggs to hatch. The red-gold light from thousands of eggs lit up every corner of the cave. Parents crouched down next to their kids, their scales sparkling in the firelight. The room was full of excitement and pride. There was one egg that looked off among the others. It was a milky white color with faint, silver veins running across its surface, like moonlight on new snow. This egg felt almost cold, while the others pulsed with a healthy amber warmth. Moms walking by gave it nervous looks. Fathers hissed quietly. The elders, who were high up on basalt ledges, squinted their eyes. High Matron finally, the oldest dragoness, Pia, spoke up. "That one doesn't have a flame," she said. "The shell sings of weakness. It isn't us." Tradition, on the other hand, said that no egg could be broken before it hatched. So the odd one stayed behind, resting in the shadows while the rest of the nest was full of life. When the egg broke, the room filled with happy shouts. As the dragonlings broke free of their shell scout, copper, obsidian, and gold sparks fell from the ceiling like tiny meteors. The white egg, on the other hand, stayed quiet and still until the last echoes faded. Then, with a sound like a thin icicle breaking, the pale shell broke. A small snout with scales as white as winter ash stuck out. Two pinkish eyes blinked at the world that was on fire. A murmur went through the cave. There were no shimmering reds or glowing ambers, just plain, unnatural white. The baby bird wobbled forward, its fragile wings shaking as it looked for its mother's warmth. His dam, a strong red name's wrath, pulled back. "By the flame," she said in a low voice, stepping back so quickly that her tail knocked over pieces of other shells. "What is this?" His father, a copper-scaled warrior named Marek, lowered his head and flared his nostrils. "It smells like cold stone," he said with a growl. No fire burns in him. The baby made a soft, high-pitched sound, like snow crunching underfoot. He tried to grab them with his little claws, but neither parent moved closer. In the days that followed, it was impossible to ignore how different the white dragonling was. His clutch mates belched little sparks and practiced spitting baby flames, but his breath was only a faint mist that was cold and wet. The others happily soaked up the heat in the lava pools, but he winced at it and stayed on the cooler edges of the cave. The other young dragons made fun of him all the time. One person laughed and said, "Ghost skill." "Frost belly," another yelled, and a playful but cruel puff of fire burned his pale tail. He learned to curl up small to stay out of the way of the kicks and wing slaps. The older hatchlings told scary stories at night. They were about dragons born without fire, cursed by old enemies, and meant to destroy the kingdom. At first, his parents tried to take care of him out of duty, but with each sunrise, shame got heavier. Marek spent more time at the warrior pits and never looked at his son. Suroth stayed away from the nesting alcove, which made him hungry and alone. The elders were watching. They talked in low voices, and last but not least, they gave him a name. Pierre told the people of the kingdom, Exiled. All that is left when true fire dies is ash. Exiled grew, but not as quickly as the others. His wings grew longer. His claws got sharper, but he never got his fire. Instead, he found a different gift, a strange ability to feel the hidden flows of air and stone. He could feel storms forming miles away, and hear the rumble of magma far below. When he tried to explain it, the others made fun of him. Granth, a strong young drake with red plates, laughed and said, "Listen to the wind." "We listen to flame, freak," but Ashvale's senses only got stronger. He found peace in the high ridges of Ember Peak, where the cold winds of the mountains whistled through his ivory wings. He practiced silent dives and lightning-fast climbs alone under the moon, and he learned to glide longer and faster than any of his family. He found safety in the sky, but the kingdom's hatred never went away. He had to stand at the edge of the circle during communal meals. He was last paired up with someone during training flights, if at all. Guards often stopped him when he came back from wandering alone. "You don't belong," they would say. "A dragon without fire is not a dragon." Ashvale sometimes thought they were right. One cold winter night, when he was only a year old, the abuse got worse. Baranth and two of his friends trapped him on a small ledge near a cliff. Baranth said with a sneer, "Let's see if a ghost can fly with a broken wing." Ashvale's heart raced. He backed up toward the drop, and the cold air whipped round him. He could have asked for help, but no adult would have helped him. He had learned that lesson very well. Baranth lunged. Instinct kicked in. Ashvale turned and ducked under the swipe with his sharp sense of wind. The bully fell forward, his claws scraping the stone. Ashvale jumped off the ledge and into the open sky. The others laughed at him and yelled, sure he would fall. Instead, he caught an updraft, and his white wings caught the moonlight like sails of silver. He flew up, leaving their taunts behind. The night air was cold and felt free. Still, the pain of being turned down was worse than any fire he could have made. The seasons changed. Ashvale became lean and strong, like a white line across dark, stormy skies. He went past the known borders, skimming froze and lakes and following deep canyons. He could see human villages far below at times, with tiny, fragile fires. He thought about what it would be like to walk among them and feel like he belonged somewhere, anywhere. He came back from a long flight one evening to find the kingdom in chaos. Big clouds of smoke came out of the lower caves. Dragons roared in fear. An elder saw him coming down and growled, "Get out of the way, Pale One. You don't belong here." But Ashvale's sharp senses picked up on something strange beneath the chaos, a deep, grinding vibration in the ground that was nothing like normal earthquakes. Something big was moving in the hot depths. He tried to tell them, "The ground, it's not okay. Something is coming." They didn't pay attention to him and instead focused on putting out a lava surge with their own flames. Ashvale stayed at the edge of the cave, fear creeping through his bones. Something old moved far below, in the dark that never ends. That night, Ashvale lay awake on a lonely cliff and thought about the stories his tormentors loved to tell. They were about the chasm serpent, an ancient enemy sealed in the planet's molten heart. He thought it was a story to scare baby birds, but the tremors in the deep sang a different truth that only he could hear. He opened his wings to the cold stars and said to himself, "They don't believe me. They will never. But I'll know when it goes up." The wind took his words into the dark, a promise only to himself. Ashvale didn't know it yet, but the tremors were the first sign of a disaster that would put the Dragon Kingdom through things it had never been through before. And when that trial came, the outcast without flame would have to choose between letting the kingdom that shunned him fall or becoming its only hope. The shakes came back before dawn. As Ashvale woke up on the cliffside, the stone under his talon shook slightly, like the heartbeat of a giant buried deep in the ground. A low rumble went through the mountain. It was so faint that it could have been mistaken for distant thunder. But he knew better. This was the same grinding rhythm he had felt the night before, the same strange beat that was coming through the bedrock. He opened his wings and jumped into the cold air, gliding toward the center of Ember Peak. The moon was low in the sky, and the ridge's black teeth made it look like it was shining on his scales. The cold hurt him, but he liked it. It never hurt him as much as it did the others. It calmed him down and made his senses sharper. He smelled acrid smoke and heard dragons screaming below as he went down toward the central cavern. The kingdom was already awake, restless from the strange sounds. Council of Fire, the great chamber was full of hot, glowing light. Elder dragons sat on the basalt ledges, their scales shining like rivers of lava that flowed through the stone like gold. The heat made the air shimmer, so Ashvale had to stay close to the cooler entrance. High Matron Pier lifted her huge, time-worn head. She said, "The mountain groans, but Ember Peak has been through storms and earthquakes for thousands of years. We won't be scared by things that aren't real." A wave of nervous whispers followed what she said. Marek, Ashvale's father with copper scales, stepped forward and spoke loudly. "I think we should make the low events tighter and the hatchling chamber stronger. This surge is stronger than any other I've seen." Brand's father, a big red drake, snorted. "Over caution, the mountain breathes, that's life. We are fire. We stay strong." Ashvale wanted to scream that they were wrong and that something much worse than a simple surge was hiding under their feet. But being ignored for so long made him quiet. He had spoken up before and been made fun of. He still couldn't keep his mouth shut completely. He said, "The tremors have a pattern," and his voice carried across the room even though the vents were roaring. "It's not a normal earthquake. There is something moving under the magma rivers." People looked. Many eyes, some glowing with molten heat, were on him. Bran smirked. He was bigger and had more muscle now. "Can you hear the wind again? Ghost skill. Maybe the mountain is singing you a lullaby." People laughed and laughed. Ashvale's stomach tightened. But he looked Pier in the eye. "You feel it too," he said, and he was surprised at how steady his voice was. "You'll know I'm right if you listen. Not with fire, but with the stone." The matron's eyes, which had slits for pupils, narrowed. The room was quiet for a heartbeat. Then she flicked her tail as if to say, "No. Be quiet, Pale One. You think a lot. Go back to being alone and let the people who really care about the council deal with it." As dragons turned away from him, the heat round him grew. They went back to thinking about how to vent lava flows. Ashvale let out a slow breath. The same old rejection, sharper than any claw. The edge of the abyss, he climbed the twisting lava-lid tunnels to the surface without saying another word. The sky outside was cold silver at the first light of dawn. It was strange to see snow on the highest peaks at this time of year. He let the tremors pull him along, and the stone's soft rhythm led him. It took him to places where few dragons would dare to go, through jagged passes that were hard to get through. By noon, he was standing at the edge of a deep chasm that legend said was the Serpent's Maw. The wind screamed through the narrow gap, bringing with it a smell of sulphur. Ashvale bent down and put his ear to the rock. Boom, boom. A slow, steady pulse that came from deep within. His heart raced. The chasm serpent wasn't just a scary thing for babies. Something huge moved deep below, scraping against the world's molten core. He was startled by a sudden hiss of wings. He turned around and saw a thin, grey dragoness with smoke-colored wings land a few steps away. Her eyes, which were the color of storm clouds, got smaller. She said, "You shouldn't be here. This pass is not allowed." It was Saffron, his scout with sharp eyes who was only a little older than him. She had never made fun of him as openly as the others had, but she had also never wanted to be around him. Ashvale said, "I could say the same to you," getting ready for scorn. She tilted her head instead, interested. "I followed you. I saw you leave the council. You looked sure of something." Ashvale was unsure. Telling others what he felt could lead to being made fun of or worse. But her steady gaze made him move forward. He said softly, "The tremors, they're not random. Something is going up." Saffron's wings moved. "I thought I felt a pattern. I wasn't sure." She moved closer, and her claws clicked on the stone. "The elders won't listen," Ashvale said. "No," with anger. "They never do." They stood together at the edge of the chasm and listened to the slow, horrible heartbeat that was below the world. Ashvale didn't feel completely alone for the first time in his life. Firestorm the next night. The kingdom woke up to a terrible dream. The mountain shook with a loud crack. The ground shook violently, throwing sleeping dragons off their perches. Lava flowed through lower tunnels, glowing an angry white. A piece of the ceiling fell behind Ashvale, and he jumped off his ledge. Families ran for safety, screams and roars filled the cave. Ashvale's heightened senses screamed louder. A deep, grinding roar from far below, a sound like the earth itself tearing apart. In the middle of the chaos, he saw Saffron fighting to lead a group of hatchlings to an upper exit. He dove in to help without thinking, spreading his pale wings to protect them from falling debris. "This way," he yelled, using the wind to find stable paths. They all worked together to guide the younglings through a twisting side tunnel just as a wave of hot rock flooded the main chamber. The mountain roared behind them. Doubt and will hours later, in the dark of night, the survivors met on a frozen plateau that looked out over the smoking volcano. Ashvale saw fewer faces than he remembered. Many of them had not made it out. High Matron Pier limped ahead. Her once beautiful wings burned. She said, "The mountain rebels. We need to pick our next place to stay." Before fear could stop him, Ashvale stepped forward. "This isn't the mountain," he said, his voice cutting through the sad whispers. "Something is getting free from below it. If we don't get ready, the next wave will take us all." The crowd moved round nervously. "You scare people with ghost stories," Bransford said. "Be quiet." But Saffron raised her head. "He speaks the truth. I felt it too. The ground shakes like a living beast." The younger dragons all agreed with a low rumble. Pier's eyes grew dark with doubt. "What do you want us to do, Pale One?" Ashvale blinked. No elder had ever asked him for advice. "We need to map the tremors," he said quickly. "I can feel where they're going. We might be able to figure out where it plans to break through if we keep an eye on the pattern. And we have to move the eggs tonight." There was a long silence. Pierre finally nodded, but not happily. "Okay." We listened to the White One. The crowd gasped in surprise. No one laughed this time. A faint new flame Ashvale led scouting flights across the range all night, mapping the pulsing vibrations. The more he concentrated, the clearer they became. A huge spiral that rose from the planet's core to the very center of Ember Peak. He was tired and landed next to Saffron on a high ridge. The sky above was filled with strange green roars that shone like ghostly fire curtains. She said softly, "You were right. We'd be dead without you." Ashvale turned away, embarrassed by the heat that rose, not from the fire, but from a strange, new pride. For the first time, his difference made him feel strong. But as he looked at the lights dancing, he felt a chill run through him. The serpent, or whatever old force was stirring below, was far from done. The tremors were getting stronger, and the mountain's heart was beating faster. "They still think this is just a storm," he said softly. "Then we show them they're wrong again," Saffron said, her eyes shining with determination. Ashvale moved his wings to keep them from freezing. He could almost hear the roar of something big and hungry far away. For the first time, he didn't just feel the pull of the sky. He felt the weight of fate settling on his white-scaled shoulders. As Ashvale stood watch on the icy ridge, the night sky was filled with ghostly green roarers. The lights shone like silent fire across the sky, and their strange glow bounced off his white scales. Every pulse of color seemed to echo the deep shakes in the ground below. The beat had gotten faster since dusk. Boom dash pause dash boom dot something old was climbing. The survivors of Ember Peak were huddled together in a rough crescent of basalt spires behind him. Dragons that used to look down on him now lay awake and on edge, their bodies ready for the next quake. Saffron walked round nearby, her smoke-grey wings tightly folded against the cold wind. "You can feel it too, right?" she asked in a low voice, Ashvale nodded. It's getting closer, maybe just a few nights away. Her amber eyes darted to the volcano's jag shape, which was still spewing black smoke. The elders are talking about whether or not to fly north to the glacier caves. Some people say we should stay and fight. They don't even know what it is, Ashvale said softly. They don't want to know. He could hear the stone under his feet, and each vibration was clear and sharp. They still believe the mountain is theirs. A broken kingdom and easy group met up again in the morning. The plateau was a stark amphitheater made of ice and dark rock. High Matron Pier stood in the middle, her once beautiful red scales dulled by soot. We can't wander round like scared hatchlings, she said, her voice cracking like drywood. The fire of Ember Peak has kept us alive for a long time. To leave it behind is to leave our hearts behind. A lot of people in the crowd were whispering. Marek, Ashvale's father with copper scales, stepped forward, smoke coming out of his nose. Matron, it's hard to keep the eggs warm on this frozen rock. We won't be able to protect them if the mountain erupts again. Brant's dad snorted, and the ridges on his thick neck flared up. Better to be cold than a coward. We lose our claim to the skies if we run away. Pierre looked round at the crowd. We stand or we die. Ashvale's claws went deep into the ice. They were fighting over land, while the ground itself promised death. He made himself talk. If we stay, we die. I drew a map of the tremors. They go up in a spiral like a tunnel. Whatever is down there will come up to the surface right where Ember Peak is. We don't need bravado. We need distance. Everyone looked at him. Even his dad's, a year ago. He would have frozen at the sight. But now he held their gaze. Do you want us to trust a dragon that doesn't breathe fire? Brant yelled and stepped forward. Maybe you used your ghost powers to call this monster. Then there was a rumble of uneasy laughter. But Pio raised a wing to signal for silence, her red eyes on Ashvale. You want us to leave the only home our kind has ever known, she said. Just on your word. No, Ashvale said firmly. On the mountain's own word. Listen. He put a claw on the ice. The plateau was quiet for a moment. Then, faint but clear, came the deep double throb of the ground. Boom. Then a pause. Then boom, boom. Dragons moved around nervously. Some put their ears to the ground. Even Brant's anger faded. Pia let out a hissing sound of sulfur. Finally, she said, we'll move the eggs north, but there will still be warriors to protect Ember Peak. We have to face this creature if it rises. Ashvale didn't want everyone to leave. But this was a good start. Help for the helpless 2 days later. A long line of dragons flew up into the grey sky, each carrying a bunch of eggs in a carefully wrapped vine net. Ashvale flew ahead with Saffron and 3 other scouts, his white wings cutting through the cold air. He had never been in charge of a flight before. He felt like he was carrying more weight than the eggs because of the trust of those behind him. He could tell where the safest thermals were by the slightest movement of the air and the slightest change in the wind. He led them over sharp ridges and through tight passes until the glacier caves opened up in front of them like blue-lit cathedrals. The walls of ice inside glowed with a light that seemed out of this world. The refugees settled in with tired thanks. For once, no one was scared by Ashvale's pale face. As he walked by, mothers bowed their heads in thanks. It felt strange to be recognized, almost too warm, but his senses never stopped buzzing. Even here, he could still feel the mountain's heartbeat, dull but persistent. The serpent was on its way. Go back to Ember Peak that night. Pierre called the warriors who would stay at the volcano to keep an eye on the threat. Ashvale was shocked when she turned to him. You hear the stone better than any of us, she said. Take charge of the next watch. Branth growled that he didn't like it. But no one said anything to the matron. Without thinking, Saffron offered to help. If he goes, I go, she said, and her tail moved like a sword. They left before dawn, their wings cutting through the pale sky as the glacier sparkled below. Ashvale led a tight group back toward the smoking cone of Ember Peak. With each mile, the smell of sulfur got stronger. When they got to the volcano, there was too much silence. The usual hissing and cracking sounds of lava flows had stopped. It seemed like the wind was holding its breath. Ashvale landed on a ledge that was blackened and pressed a claw to the rock. The vibration hit him like a punch. Boom, 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 boom. Quick and ending. The serpent was almost at the top. He said, "Something's wrong," in a sharp voice. "It's quicker now." Saffron crouched next to him with big eyes. "How long?" He shook his head. "Hours, maybe not as much." The awakening a shudder went through the mountain, almost knocking them off their perches. The ground split with a sound like metal tearing. A geyser of molten rock shot up from the middle crater, sending fire into the sky as it got darker. Then came the roar, which shook the air like a hurricane. A huge head of black stone and molten cracks rose from the crater. Its eyes were like to furnaces, and its jaws were lined with obsidian teeth. The serpent of the chasm. Its body was a never-ending coil of rock and lava, with scales the size of boulders. As it uncoiled into the sky, steam hissed from vents along its spine, blocking out the stars. Ashvale's heart raced. People had talked about it in stories, but none of them could do it justice. This mountain breaker would make even the proudest elder look like prey. The warriors acted right away. Baranth sent out a stream of flames, and others followed, spewing out streams of molten fire. The serpent hardly moved. Their flames slid harmlessly across its basalt skin. Ashvale's mind was racing. Regular fire wouldn't work. This creature was made of magma and fed by heat. It could only be hurt by something other than fire. A different force serpent struck, and its huge tail whipped across the ledge. Two warriors fell into the void, screaming. Ashvale dodged, and his senses screamed at him to move before each one. He could feel the changes in air pressure and the tremor of each coil. "Get out of here," he yelled. "Don't grip up." The others did what they were told, even though they were proud. Saffron turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "What should we do?" Ashvale looked at the monster's glowing cracks. They gave off heat like a furnace. He remembered that the cold never hurt him, and that even in the hottest caves, his breath was always damp and cold. Maybe the cold was the answer. He banked hard and dove toward a glacial pocket near the edge of the crater, where deep cracks had kept old snow alive. He scooped up big chunks of frozen crystals, which made his throat feel numb. Then he turned and let out all of his breath. A plume of cold mist shot out of his lungs, whiter than moonlight, and cut through the heat like a spear of winter. The vapor hit the serpent's closest crack. When the lava glow faded, steam erupted. The creature hissed and pulled back, shaking the heavens. Dragons were shocked. Brand stared in shock while flying. What was that? Ashvale didn't respond. He dove again, taking in more cold air and blowing another blast of freezing fog onto the monster's molten skin. The hiss got louder, and cracks in the brittle stone spread across its scales like spider webs. "It hates the cold." Saffron was crying. "Everyone, use the snow." "Stop it." Warriors turned toward the glacier pockets, scooping up ice and carrying it. The flames that had been there before turned into blasts of superheated air that Ashvale's mist turned into sudden frost. They hit the serpent with heat and cold in turns, making the giant shake. A peak-at-fatigued serpent screamed, a roar that shook the sky and hurt your ears. It pulled back into the crater with a violent lunge, its coils thrashing. Lava geysers shot out like bloody rain, but the creature kept moving deeper and deeper until all that was left was the sound of its rage. The scarred volcano was quiet. The air smelled like burning stone and frozen steam. Dragons were shocked and couldn't believe what they saw. Then a cheer broke out. echoing from one cliff to the next. Branth walked up to Ashvale. His red scales burned. For once, he didn't look like he was making fun of him. He looked in awe. You saved us." Ashvale could feel the weight of every look and every roar of victory. He wasn't an outcast for the first time. He was a protector of the kingdom. But deep down in the earth, he could still feel the faint heartbeat. It was slower now, but it was still there. He said quietly to Saffron, who landed next to him, "This isn't over." She nodded, and the light from the crater reflected in her eyes. "Then we'll be ready. You'll be ready." Ashvale looked up at the stars, his breath still fogging up in the cold. The white dragon, who was never meant to be there, had found a power that no flame bear had, and he knew the serpent would come back. The days after the battle were full of smoke and disbelief. Ashvale sat on a high basalt arch at the top of the volcano, watching grey clouds twist into a sky filled with green rollers. Ember Peak was still rumbling under him, but the violent shakes had turned into a slow, uneasy pulse. The chasm serpent had gone away, but its presence was still there, like a nightmare that wouldn't go away. Dragons worked to fix the broken kingdom far below. Warriors brought stones to fix ledges. Healers wrapped burnt wings in moss and cool clay, and mothers sang to the scared hatchlings. Everything smelled like burned rock and frozen steam. Ashvale thought that people would stop paying attention to him once the danger was over. Instead, every dragon that flew by bowed their heads in greeting. Branth, who used to be his loudest bully, even gave him a stiff nod of respect before going back to work. It was strange, even scary. For a long time, he had been the ghost on the edge of every group. Now, word of Ashvale the Frostbreather spread through the kingdom like wildfire. Ashvale, the bane of the serpent, the High Council called a meeting in the great lava hall 3 nights after the battle. Instead of its usual molten glow, the chamber flickered with torchlight because the serpent had attacked it and it was half collapsed. The black walls were covered in soot that looked like scars. Matron Hypea stood in the middle, her red wings freshly bandaged. The elders crowded round her, their eyes reflecting the dim flames. Ashvale walked in slowly, with Saffron by his side. "Dragons of Ember Peak," Pierce said, her voice echoing through the room. "We have passed a test that will be remembered in the songs of our children. We owe our lives to the person who many people used to call an outcast." Many people looked at Ashvale. He fought the urge to shrink away from their gaze. "Your frost saved us," Pierce said again. "The serpent would have eaten our kingdom if it hadn't been for it. We owe you a debt." There was a low rumble of agreement in the hall. Marek, Ashvale's father, stepped forward. His copper scales were dull with soot. "I couldn't tell what he was thinking." Marek said, "I was wrong about you, son." His voice was rough. "I was afraid of what I didn't know. But you are from Ember Peak and are stronger than any fire." The words hit Ashvale harder than the serpent's roar. He could only nod for a moment. Pierre raised her head. "But the serpent is still alive. The ground is still shaking. We need to get ready and pick a leader to help us get through the storm that is coming." People in the crowd whispered to each other. A council of elders used to rule Ember Peak. But after all the chaos, the dragons wanted one person to lead them. Bran's father stepped up and spoke with authority. "We need a warrior who has shown bravery in battle. Someone who can use fire to protect our kind." Saffron interrupted him before he could say anything else. "Just having courage won't stop what's down there. We need the person who knows the enemy, the one who has already fought it and won." She looked Ashvale in the eye with her stormy grey eyes. "We need him. A crown of fire and ice." The council talked for a long time, and their voices echoed off the blackstone. Some older people didn't like the idea of an albino dragon with no flames as their leader. Some people said that the old ways had almost killed them. Ashvale stood there in shock as his name was said over and over again. He had never wanted power, not even in his wildest dreams. All he wanted for most of his life was a place to fit in. Finally, Pierre raised her claws to get quiet. The mountain speaks through its trials. Ashvale has heard its song when the rest of us couldn't. When our fire went out, he saved us. I call him Ember Peak's High Warden. A loud, deep cheer filled the room and echoed like thunder. All the dragons stamped their claws at the same time. Sparks flew through the smoky air like little stars. Ashvale bowed his head, his heart racing. He simply said, "I'll lead us. But know this, the serpent is not done yet. We need to be ready to fight again." Getting ready for the inevitable under Ashvale's command. The next few days were a blur of activity. Scots made maps of every crack round the volcano, noting where the tremors were strongest. Smith dragons made new channels to send lava into defensive moats. For the first time in a long time, dragons with rare powers like Ashvale's trained together, both fire-breathing and frost-casting. Ashvale learned that he could improve his chill breath. He could throw an ice spear so sharp that it broke obsidian by diving into the highest, coldest mountain winds, and then exhaling. Saffron was quick and creative. She learned how to combine her flames with his frost to make sudden bursts of steam that broke rocks. The old warriors were amazed as they watched. Two elements in harmony. Marek said quietly one night as he watched them practice. "Fire and frost. Maybe this is how we win." Ashvale never let himself relax, even though things were getting better. Every night, he could feel the mountain's hidden heartbeat. Yes, slower, but steady, like a predator getting stronger. Doubts in the shadows. Some dragons did not agree with his rule. One night, while Ashvale was looking over the western ridges, Branth came up to him with his red wings glowing in the sunset. Branth said, "You lead well." But he didn't want to. "But some say that your frost will freeze our history. They're afraid that you will make Ember Peak a kingdom of ice." Ashvale looked at the bigger dragon and could tell that there was a mix of respect and anger. "I don't want to change who we are," he said. "I want us to live. We are still dragons, whether it's fire or frost." Branth tilted his head and thought about it. "If you make a mistake, the kingdom will burn or freeze. Keep that in mind." It wasn't a threat. It was more of a challenge, and Ashvale nodded to accept it. The second awakening, the warning, came at dawn on the 10th day. A strong, deep quake shook Ember Peak, stronger than any other quake. There was a flash of green and violet light in the sky. The crater let out a roar that broke up the clouds. Ashvale jumped off his ledge, and his wings opened. "Positions," he yelled, and his voice echoed across the mountains. Dragons rushed to the defensive posts they had been practicing for days. Frost casters gathered round icy vents, and fire breathers lined the lava channels. Saffron joined Ashvale at the front ridge, her eyes blazing. A huge plume of molten rock shot up from the ground, splitting it wide open. The chasm serpent rose up again, this time bigger than before. Its black scales were covered in glowing cracks. The air shook with a sound like grinding mountains. Ember Peak was ready this time. "Now," Ashvale cried. A lot of dragons breathed at once, sending out a storm of steam and broken stone as their combined power sent out burning fire and biting frost. The serpent screamed and pulled back as pieces of its basalt hide broke off. The monster hit back, throwing its tail at a terrifying speed. Ashvale felt the air pressure change and dove to the side, just in time to warn the others. He shot back with a focused lance of icy mist that pierced one of the creature's glowing eyes. The serpent roared and thrashed round. Saffron swooped down low and let out a cone of blue-white fire where Ashvale's frost had already frozen the stone. The sudden change in temperature made a loud crack, and a piece of the serpent's armored coil broke like glass. The point of no return, the battle raged across the night sky, with fire and frost painting the dark sky in violent light. Ashvale moved with instinctive accuracy, his body aware of every tremor and rush of air. He gave the others clear orders and knew what the monster would do before it did. Finally, he saw it, a deep crack at the base of the serpent's neck where molten glow pulsed like a heart. He yelled, "There, strike together." Dragons came together, breathing fire that melted everything in its path, while Ashvale let out the coldest blast of his life. The combined force made a shockwave of steam so strong that it sounded like thunder. The serpent shook and screamed in pain as the crack grew wider. The creature shivered one last time, shaking the ground and falling back into the crater, where it broke the rim behind it. A geyser of steam and ash shot up, and then there was complete and total silence. What happened next? The dragon stayed still and quiet after the echo stopped. Ashvale looked round the dark pit. No shaking, no pulse. Saffron landed next to him, out of breath. "Did we?" He nodded slowly, but doubt hung over him like a shadow. For now, people cheered all over the ridges. Flames shot up into the air in celebration, mixing with the shining roars. The dragons called Ashvale's name, and their voices rose like a victory song. He felt not only acceptance, but also unity for the first time. Fire and frost, which had always been seen as enemies, were now working together to stay alive. High Matron Pier came closer, and the green light caught her at wings. "You're the first dragon in our history to do this," she said. "You are our king as well as our warden." The word echoed through the night. King. Ashvale's chest felt tight. He thought of the baby bird that had once been called a ghost and of the long, cold nights alone. He looked at the dragons that had come together. They had once made fun of him, but now they were bowing their heads. "I will lead," he said, and his voice sounded like a promise. "But don't forget that fire and frost are not our strengths. It's togetherness." The crowd cheered, and the sound echoed through the mountains like thunder. The auroras above them burned brighter, as if the sky itself crowned the albino dragon king of Ember Peak, protector of fire and ice. Ashvale thought that peace would feel like warm sunlight. It was more light than ice over deep water, shimmering, but very fragile. It had been weeks since the big battle. The skies over Ember Peak were clear. The volcano's tremors turned into a sleepy thrum, and the dragons got to work rebuilding. New nests grew out of hot stone. New lava channels glowed like orange rivers, and kids played in the hot air that rose up, their laughter echoing off of black cliffs. It looked like victory from the outside, but inside the newly built council chamber, an ease cold like a snake that wasn't seen. A kingdom to rule every morning brought a lot of choices. Ashvale settled arguments over hunting grounds, agreed to the rebuilding of lava forges, and listened to requests from faraway clans that wanted to join forces with Ember Peak. He pressed a talon into wax to sign each order, and his breath made a seal with a frost edge. The dragons called him king and did what he said without question, but being completely loyal was a double-edged sword. The more people asked him questions, the heavier the mountain felt on his pale shoulders. Saffron saw. She always did. One night, as they stood on a ridge where the roars flowed like silver banners, she said, "You haven't slept. Your eyes hold storms." Ashvale let out a cloud of cold mist. "The serpent is gone, but the earth still moves. I hear it in my dreams." Saffron told him, "You beat it twice. What else could it want?" Ashvale looked down into the dark crater below, where a faint heat shimmered. It wasn't just a thing. It was something that had been round for a while. Something that waits. Whispers in the night. The new moon was the first sign. Miners looking for rare quartz near the lower tunnels heard a humming sound that sounded like stone grinding on stone. Days later, cracks spread like spider webs across the outer slopes, but the volcano stayed strangely quiet. The council told people to be careful. Branth, who is now one of Ashvale's strongest supporters, said that the outer nest should be evacuated right away. But some people, who wanted to keep trade going with nearby rangers, ignored the warnings and said the mountain was settling after battle. Ashvale could feel the low vibration under his claws and knew. Better, he remembered how the serpent's body sank into the hot depths and how it screamed as it died. It wasn't really dead. It had gone back. That night, he went back to the edge of the crater by himself. The cold wind whipped his white scales as he looked into the dark. He could almost taste the sound of that old roar. A whisper seemed to rise with the steam. King of Frost, you can't cave the deep. A risky partnership the next morning. A group of dragons with scales that sparkled like cut crystal came from the faraway Skyglass range, Lady Thrine. Their leader bowed low in front of Ashvale. We felt the quakes from leagues away, she said, her voice like bells. If the chasm serpent comes back, it won't stop at Ember Peak. We want to form an alliance. Ashvale could feel the tension in his own council. Some older people didn't like the idea of outsiders using their sacred volcano, but he could see past pride. He said, "Unity saved us before. It might save us again. We agree." The dragons from Skyglass brought new ways to fight and old songs to protect. They wove protective runes across the edge of the crater, and their breath, which had turned into crystals, made a sparkling lattice that bent the light. But the ground's slow, steady pulse never stopped. Fire and frost together training started again, and this time it was more than before. Fire breathers from Ember Peak and Skyglass frost casters practiced next to each other, combining searing heat and razor cold into moves that no dragon had ever tried before. Ashvale and Saffron showed off a new move. She shot out a spiral of blue fire while he blew out an icy wind, making a cyclone of steam that even the sharpest eyes couldn't see through. Ashvale told the warriors who had come to see him in awe together, "We are a storm that no darkness can stand." Every night, when he finally fell asleep, the mountain talked to him in dreams. It sounded like a heartbeat in stone, slow but loud, promising a reckoning. Heartbreak lines, even though there was a threat. Life went on round the volcano. Hatchlings chased fireflies that looked like little embers. Traders brought rare ores from faraway mountains. Ashvale had never felt what it was like to be part of a living, thriving kingdom before. But there were times of silence that showed cracks he couldn't ignore. Marek's father, who had been estranged from him, tried to awkwardly bring them back together. They shared one hunting flight, and the only sound was the wind. Marek finally said, "I was afraid of how different you were. Now I see that it is our salvation. I wish I had seen it sooner." Ashvale looked him in the eye. "The mountain forgives. We must do the same." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a good start. Saffron also seemed to look at him in a new way. Their partnership, which had started in battle, grew into something that neither of them could fully name. Even though his breath was cold, heat sparked when their wings touched in midair. But Ashvale couldn't stay warm for long. Every morning, the mountain's pulse got stronger. The sign as the auroras turned blood red on the night before the harvest moon, Ember Peak shook violently. Cracks ran through the crater wall, and glowing magma surged up, lighting up the night in angry orange. The alarm drums rang out across the hills. Ashvale flew into the sky, and his command was clear. "Defensive formation. Get the hatchlings out of there." The chasm serpent's roar came from deep inside the volcano. It was angry, powerful, and alive. The ground shook. Whole ledges fell apart, sending showers of obsidian shards into the void. Lightning ripped through the sky, lighting up the horror below, a huge shape rising through flames and smoke, its eyes burning like two suns. The serpent was bigger than before, with molten cracks running through its scales and steam coming out of its fanged mouth. It had been reborn in the heart of the mountain, shaped by both fire and ice. Ashvale stood at the front lines, where the cold of his breath met the heat of the magma winds. He whispered to Saffron, who was right next to him, It begins." Her eyes were full of determination. "Then we finish it," she said. Hundreds of dragons, both Ember Peak and Skyglass, lined up behind them. Their roars shook the stars. Ashvale felt like the mountain's heartbeat was the same as his. This wouldn't be a fight. This was meant to be. Warriors of flame and frost. His voice echoed through the storm. "Tonight we don't fight for land. We fight for the sky itself. We are the storm together." A loud chorus answered, a roar of unity that echoed like thunder across the mountains. The serpent shot up, its molten wings spreading out like it had learned from other snakes. Lava fell from its body, setting the clouds on fire. Ashvale breathed out a blizzard so cold that the air cracked, and saffron fire twisted through it like a comet's tail. The first blow of the last wall made the night brighter than dawn. The chasm serpent rose from the volcano's heart, and the sky turned red and white. Its molten scales shone like 1,000 suns, and every time it moved, it sent burning rock flying all over the world. The ash clouds were full of lightning, and the mountain's roar shook every ridge on Ember Peak. Ashvale felt the quake shake his chest, which was the same as how hard his heart was beating. Hundreds of dragons flew in formation round him, the red warriors of Ember Peak and the sparkling frost casters of Skyglass were finally together. "Keep the lines," Ashvale yelled, and his voice cut through the storm. "No one fights by themselves." The rage of the serpent's wings, if they could be called that, opened up in a spray of lava, making huge arcs of living magma. It lunged up into the sky with a screech that sounded like stone breaking. A wall of molten rock flew out, scattering dragons. Ashvale dove down, tucking his wings in. A fireball roared by, burning the ends of his pale tail. The volcano erupted in a column of fire below. Lava flowed down the hills like rivers, lighting up the night like a second sun. "Now, circle strike." Ashvale told them to. Dragons send out streams of hot fire and cold winds from all sides. Red and blue energy swirled around the monster, and the air screamed as hot and cold met. The serpent roared, and the sound seemed to break the sky. But its molten skin hardly blistered. Wings of ice, hard of fire saffron sped by, her blue flames burning so brightly that they cut through the thick smoke. "Its chest," she yelled, "the scars from before, they're not as strong." Ashvale saw them, thin silver lines where the frost from his first battle had bitten deep. He turned sharply, hit the scars. "All units, come together." The dragons attacked at the same time, using jets of flame to soften the plates and shards of ice to break them. The serpent thrashed round, sending clouds of steam into the air. But the beast was smart this time. It whipped its molten tail across the formation with a twist of its huge body, sending dozens of warriors spinning. Ashvale dove in to stop it, breathing out a cold wind that froze pieces of lava in midair, stopping the tail's movement. He yelled, "Regroup," even though the shock wave hurt his wing. The mountain's heart Ashvale felt the earth's deeper rhythm through the chaos. It was the same old pulse that had haunted his dreams. It wasn't just the serpent's heart beating. The mountain was alive and angry. He suddenly saw the truth in a flash of icy clarity. Killing the serpent won't stop this. The mountain is where it was born. We have to cut it off from the core. He called out, "Saffron," and climbed up next to her until their breaths lit up the clouds. We have to stop it from getting to the lava source. Freeze the vents in the core. Her eyes got bigger. That's killing yourself. Only if we fail. For a moment, they locked eyes and forgot about the storm round them. Then she nodded, strong and sure. "Go ahead." Descent into fire. Ashvale and Saffron dove toward the crater while the others kept the serpent's attention. The heat became too much to bear, but Ashvale's cold ore made a narrow path through the hot air. Deep down, glowing cracks showed rivers of pure magma veins that fed the monster's rebirth. He could feel the mountain's heartbeat in his bones. He yelled, "This is it." Over the noise, they let loose a cyclone of frost and flame, which is an impossible mix of elements. The river of lava hissed loudly and broke into glassy stone. The tremors got worse, and the mountain screamed as its blood froze. The serpent let out a scream that broke the air above them. It thrashed round, feeling the lifeline get weaker. The last stand the creature dove toward them like a mountain of fire and rage. Ashvale shot up to meet it head-on, her white wings glowing with cold mist. "Ember Peak," he yelled at the sky. "With me." Baranth and the united flights answered, sending a storm of fire and ice. The serpent twisted and turned, its chest plates glowing white hot. Ashvale used all of his strength. Frost swirled round him and turned into a spear of pure winter. He screamed, and the sound echoed across the mountains as he dove straight for the creature's scarred heart. The cold spear went deep. As the serpent shook, steam shot out in all directions. Saffron then shot a blast of sapphire fire, which closed the wound in a cage of crystal and flame. The monster screamed once, a sound that shook the sky, and then it fell apart into a shower of molten shards that fell harmlessly into the crater. After the storm, there was silence. It was like a huge veil had been lifted from the sky. Emerald and violet roars spread across the night sky, bouncing off the frozen crater that was now covered in glass. Ashvale floated, her chest rising and falling. The mountain's heartbeat, the old, scary thrum, was gone. There was only the soft crackle of stone cooling. The dragons cheered, and the sound rolled like thunder from far away. Baranth pumped his wings in victory. Skyglass warriors with crystal scales spun in bright spirals. Saffron moved smoothly to Ashvale's side, her eyes shining. "It's over," she said in a low voice. Ashvale let out a cloud of cold mist that sparkled in the new starlight. "It's only the beginning," he said softly, but his lips curled into a small, peaceful smile. A crown that was chosen, not given the last dragons gathered on the highest plateau at dawn. Elders from both Ember Peak and Skyglass bowed their heads in front of Ashvale. High Matron Pierce stepped forward. Her scales were dull, but her eyes were bright. "You brought together fire and frost," she said. "You saved not only our kingdom, but the whole world. You are our king in spirit and in scale." The crowd chanted his name over until it became a living roar. "Ashvale, Ashvale." Ashvale didn't look away from them for the first time. He didn't feel like he needed to hide the shine on his white scales. Difference had become fate. He looked at Saffron, whose smile showed both pride and quiet love. He said, "This crown belongs to all of us," and his voice carried across the peaks. "To every dragon who chose to be together instead of being afraid." The legacy of flame and frost under Ashvale's rule, Ember Peak thrived through the seasons. Trade routes got bigger, kids of all colors played together, and their laughter filled the air where prejudice had once been. The tale of the Albino king traveled over mountains and oceans. There were songs about the night, fire, and frost becoming one, and about the dragon who turned fear into hope and exile into strength. When the northern lights danced every winter, dragons would look up at the sky and think about the pale-winged ruler who taught them that being different can make you strong. Ashvale flew high above the quiet mountain. She was no longer the outcast hatchling. She was the eternal bridge between flame and ice. The end.